Everyone thinks the eureka moment in the lab is the hardest part.
Oh, totally. That myth is everywhere.
Right. There is this pervasive mythology in our culture that if you just have a brilliant idea, like if you could just figure out the science or write the core algorithm or sketch out the perfect design on a napkin, then the rest is just details.
Like the world will just automatically beat a path to your door.
Exactly. But it is a complete illusion. I mean, the vast majority of brilliant inventions, things that could genuinely change the world, they just die silently on a shelf somewhere.
Because having the genius idea is actually the easiest part of the journey.
Yeah, surviving that brutal, messy transition from an abstract concept into a viable, protected, and profitable reality in the actual market, that is where the real war is fought.
It is a phenomenal misconception. People conflate the spark of creation with the sustained, agonizing fire of commercial execution.
Agonizing is definitely the right word for it.
Because the transition from the abstract to the concrete, it requires an entirely different skill set, a different mindset and a tolerance for friction that, frankly, most inventors simply do not possess.
And that brutal transition is our entire focus today. So welcome to our deep dive.
Thanks.
Our mission for this session is highly specific and vital for anyone operating in the modern economy.
We are taking a really comprehensive, exhaustive journey through the entire life cycle of technology and innovation.
Right, specifically acting as a masterclass for Unit 2. We have gathered the core concepts, the underlying frameworks, the strategic maneuvers, and we are unpacking all of it to effectively replace a traditional textbook for you.
Think of it as looking at the underlying machinery, not just defining what these business concepts are, but deeply analyzing how they actually work.
Why they matter.
Exactly, and how they interact in the real world. A theoretical understanding of innovation is basically useless if you don't understand the economic and psychological forces driving it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And here's our promise to you, the listener.
Yeah.
By the time we wrap up this deep dive, you're going to confidently understand this entire landscape. You'll be fully prepped for common exam topics, sure, but more importantly, you will know exactly how to apply these theoretical frameworks to solve very real, highly complex startup challenges.
Because knowledge in a vacuum is just trivia, right? The goal here is strategic application. We want you to be able to look at a struggling venture or even your own business idea and immediately identify where the structural fault lines are.
To keep us grounded in that reality, throughout this discussion, we are going to run what I like to call startup stress tests.
I love these.
Yeah, they're great. These are essentially mental scenarios, the kind of critical decision points you would face in a boardroom or, frankly, on a high-level exam. And they're designed to test your practical understanding of the concepts we're covering. I'll throw out a scenario, and we will break down exactly how to navigate it.
It forces you to move from passive listening to active problem solving, which is the best way to internalize the mechanics.
So let's jump right into the deep end. Before we can even think about building a business or designing a go-to-market strategy, we have to define exactly what it is we are building.
Which means clearing up the single most common misconception in the entrepreneurial world.
Right. The conflation of invention and innovation.
They are consistently used interchangeably in casual conversation, but in the realm of technology and business strategy, drawing a hard line between those two words is the foundation of everything else we're going to discuss.
Here's how I visualize it to keep them separate. Invention is it's the act of mining uranium. You've pulled something powerful and rare out of the ground. It is the first occurrence of an idea for a new product or a process.
It's the scientific or conceptual breakthrough.
Right, but raw uranium sitting in a bucket does not light up a city. Innovation, on the other hand, is the act of successfully building the nuclear reactor, containing the reaction, connecting it to the grid, and getting the city to actually pay for the electricity without blowing anything up.
That is a highly visceral analogy, but it perfectly captures the stakes. An invention is merely conceptual novelty, but an innovation requires successful economic implementation.
Economic implementation, that's the key phrase.
Exactly. And what's truly fascinating and often heartbreaking for inventors is the temporal reality of that transition. There is almost always a massive delay, sometimes spanning decades, between the moment a technology is invented and the moment it becomes an innovation.
Wait, decades? Give me an example of that, because we tend to think of tech moving at lightning speed. You invent it on Monday, you launch it on Friday.
Well, the smartphone is the classic example here. If you look at the underlying technologies, capacitive touchscreens, lithium-ion batteries, early voice recognition, cellular networks, almost all of those individual components were invented in the 1970s and 1980s.
Seriously, That early.
Oh, yeah. They existed as concepts and clunky prototypes in university labs and military research centers. But they were just inventions. It took decades of maturation, cost reduction, and visionary integration before someone could package them into a consumer device like the iPhone in 2007.
And achieve that successful economic implementation.
Precisely.
So if there is this massive perilous gap of years or decades where an idea just languishes, what is the catalyst? What finally bridges the gap between the uranium in the bucket and the functioning power plant?
The bridge is the entrepreneur. That is their fundamental economic function.
So they aren't necessarily the inventor.
Usually they aren't. They are the passionate visionary whose primary role is to act as an innovative economic agent. They take the abstract invention, organize the human capital, secure the financial resources, navigate the regulatory landscape, and basically force the concept into the market.
They are the forcing function of commercialization. But I want to challenge the idea of the lone wolf entrepreneur here. We have this Silicon Valley myth of the solitary genius in a garage, right? Willing a multi-billion-dollar company into existence through sheer force of personality.
Oh, the lone genius is a romantic myth, but it is empirically false.
Yeah.
Technological innovation is an interactive phenomenon.
Which brings us to the triple helix concept.
Yes. The triple helix concept beautifully illustrates this by highlighting three distinct pillars that must play together in a highly synchronized way: universities, companies, and governments.
Okay, I understand universities and companies. Universities provide the foundational research, the raw inventions that companies wouldn't fund because the ROI is too far out.
Right.
And companies provide the commercialization engine.
Right.
But let me play devil's advocate regarding the third pillar. Governments are notoriously slow, bureaucratic, and risk-averse. Doesn't heavy government involvement usually stifle tech startups rather than help them?
It is a really common intuition, but if you look closely at the data and historical precedent, the government is the invisible hand that makes the entire ecosystem possible.
Really? How so?
First, they provide the massive, high-risk foundational funding that even venture capitalists won't touch. The early internet, GPS, the foundational algorithms for search engines, those were funded by government defense or science grants.
Okay.
But beyond funding, governments provide the regulatory framework and macroeconomic stability. To encourage entrepreneurs to take the massive risks required to form new ventures, you absolutely need favorable economic conditions.
Because if the broader economy is stagnant, the risk tolerance of both entrepreneurs and investors just plummets to zero.
Exactly. Furthermore, deliberate national policies directly shape whether an ecosystem thrives or dies. The sources specifically highlight examples like Nepal's National Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy of 2019 or their National Startups Policy of 2080.
I'm glad you brought those up. Those aren't just bureaucratic window dressing.
Far from it. When structured correctly, those policies dictate tax incentives, intellectual property protections, ease of incorporating a business, direct grants. They are the architectural blueprints for the ecosystem. If the government fails to create a fertile environment, the universities and the companies have no stable ground to build upon.
The triple helix just collapses.
Completely.
Okay, assuming the ecosystem is healthy and the entrepreneur successfully bridges the gap to create a true innovation, the result is not just a peaceful addition to the market. The introduction of something truly new triggers a phenomenon called creative destruction.
Which is a brilliant term.
It sounds like a magnificent name for a heavy metal band, honestly. But in economics, it is incredibly ruthless. What exactly is being destroyed?
Well, it's a dramatic term, and the reality of it is equally dramatic. Creative destruction describes the fundamental paradox of economic progress. When innovators introduce new technologies, they don't just exist alongside the old ways of doing things.
They fundamentally undermine current practices.
Yes. They actively render existing products obsolete, they invalidate older production methods, and they aggressively drive established legacy companies out of business.
So progress essentially demands casualties. You can't have an innovation boom without some traditional industries going under.
That is the uncompromising reality of the market. It's a dual mechanism. The innovation brings immense growth to the economy, but the exact same mechanism actively destroys the profits of the established dominant players. These moments are known as technological discontinuities.
Technological discontinuity, meaning the continuous line of an industry's history just snaps.
Precisely. Think of the transition from the ice harvesting industry to modern refrigeration in the early 20th century. You had massive global enterprises with fleets of ships and thousands of workers dedicated to cutting ice from frozen lakes.
A huge, highly optimized industry.
And then someone figures out how to compress a refrigerant gas in a metal box in your kitchen.
And overnight, the ice harvesting empires meant absolutely nothing. They were wiped out, not because they became inefficient, but because a technological discontinuity changed the nature of the problem.
The old must be mercilessly destroyed to clear the path for the new.
Which brings us to the ultimate psychological challenge for the entrepreneur. You are operating in an environment that is deeply messy, uncertain, iterative. The commercialization journey is a discovery process where you constantly have to improvise.
You cannot plan a radical innovation linearly. You have to be ruthlessly adaptable.
Okay, let's lock in these foundational concepts with our first startup stress test.
Let's do it.
Listeners, I want you to visualize this scenario and decide how you would categorize it based on the strict divide between invention and innovation. So imagine a brilliant biochemist working in the state-funded university lab. After 5 years of rigorous research, she successfully synthesizes a completely new, highly stable chemical compound that dramatically accelerates cellular regeneration in mice.
A genuine scientific breakthrough.
Exactly. She meticulously documents the formula, puts it in a binder, and places it on a shelf in the lab. For the next 10 years, that binder remains entirely untouched. No patents are filed, no manufacturing process is developed, and obviously no product is ever sold to consumers or hospitals.
Okay.
So the question is that groundbreaking chemical compound an innovation? Why or why not?
If we rigorously apply the analytical framework we just built, the answer is definitively no.
Not an innovation.
Right. It is an invention, and only an invention. It perfectly represents the first occurrence of an idea and the successful creation of a new physical compound. However, because it has languished on a shelf and has not interacted with the market, it entirely lacks successful economic implementation.
The nuclear reactor was never built.
Exactly. Until an entrepreneur or enterprise acquires that formula, figures out mass production, navigates FDA approval, markets it, and introduces it into active consumption, it remains an abstract scientific achievement.
Spot on. So now that we have a crystal clear understanding of what innovation actually is, the immediate question is, how do we systematically conjure it? We need to transition from grand macroeconomic theory down to the step-by-step roadmap. How do organizations actually manage this?
Well, while the external environment is messy, the internal organizational process must be systematic. The standard framework breaks this down into 5 discrete sequential stages.
Let's pull this apart. Step 1.
Step 1 is idea generation and mobilization. The first half is obvious, the active quest for ideas. But the crucial, often fatal second half is mobilization. Once the brilliant idea is generated, it absolutely must travel to a different physical or logical location within the organization.
I am so glad we are highlighting this. Why does the idea have to physically or logically move away from the person who came up with it?
Because of a fundamental truth about human skill sets, most brilliant inventors are terrible marketers. The mental attributes required to solve a complex engineering problem in isolation are often the exact opposite of the attributes required to negotiate with investors and read market psychology.
I call this the inventor's trap. You see it in startups all the time. The brilliant engineer who wrote the core code insists on designing the user interface and pitching the VCs, and the startup implodes.
They have deep emotional attachment to the idea, but lack objective commercial distance. Skipping this mobilization phase will inevitably sabotage the innovation.
It is a massive trap. But if you successfully mobilize the idea, you reach step 2, advocacy and screening.
Yes, this is where you rigorously evaluate the mobilized idea. You measure potential benefits against projected problems. It is entirely about refinement and risk mitigation.
So this is where the corporate immune system tries to kill the idea.
Exactly, and intentionally so. Not all ideas are worth implementing. You must meticulously analyze customer requirements and ensure the innovation aligns with real-world demands, not just the engineering team's fantasies.
You are poking holes in the ship to see if it sinks before you put it in the ocean.
Precisely, and if it survives the screening, it moves to step 3, experimentation.
Where theory meets reality.
Right. This is where you test the idea in the physical world, you build prototypes, run pilot tests, and crucially, conduct real-world market tests to gather unvarnished insights from actual users. You are no longer guessing what the customer wants.
The goal here isn't to prove you're right, but to actively look for flaws so you can fix them.
Yes, continuous refinement.
Okay, so we had the idea, we handed it to the right people, screened it, and built a prototype that survived real customers. We have a winner. Step 4.
Step 4 is commercialization and marketing. Now your focus shifts entirely to creating market value. You are moving from a prototype to a scalable physical manifestation of the product.
And I imagine the sheer logistical nightmare of this phase is where a lot of dreams die. Building one perfect prototype is entirely different from building 100,000 of them profitably.
That is the crux of commercialization. Establishing exact manufacturing specifications, setting up mass production facilities, establishing complex procurement networks for raw materials, and arranging global logistics.
You are building the machine that builds the product.
Exactly.
And once that machine is humming, we hit the final stage. Step 5.
Step 5 is diffusion and implementation. Diffusion refers to the widespread acceptance of the innovative idea within the broader market. You are actively identifying early adopters, educating the consumer base, and setting up everything necessary to support the innovation at a massive scale.
Now, a really critical point for anyone studying this. This is not a launch it and leave it situation. The text makes it very clear that innovation requires a continuous loop.
If you treat innovation as a finite project with an end date, you will inevitably be disrupted. After implementation, you must conduct rigorous, ongoing reviews. You have to maintain a continuous feedback loop and obsessively track performance against your key performance indicators, or KPIs.
Because market dynamics are fluid. If you aren't adapting based on those KPIs, your breakthrough innovation becomes an obsolete legacy product frighteningly fast. Look at Nokia or BlackBerry.
They reached step 5, achieved global diffusion, and then stopped looping. They failed to iterate when the market signaled a shift toward touchscreens.
They fell victim to their own success. This ties directly into the broader technology innovation life cycle, which demands continuous diagnosis of the environment, relentless SWOT analysis, and actively finding out what matters to customers today.
And we need to highlight a massive conceptual trap here. When we list these steps 1 through 5, it implies a clean, linear progression. But the reality is far messier.
Right, they overlap.
Definitively not linear. They constantly overlap, bleed into one another, and reverse. An entrepreneur will almost always iterate several cycles before finding product-market fit. You might reach experimentation, realize the prototype fails, and cycle all the way back to idea generation.
Okay, time for another startup stress test. Listeners, put yourself in the shoes of a chief operations officer at a mid-sized tech firm.
All right.
You've been tracking a new hardware project for 18 months. The initial idea was successfully generated and mobilized. The business development team screened the concept and projected a highly favorable ROI. You just completed a pilot program, and the prototype performed flawlessly.
Sounds like a successful project so far.
Right. Now, your team is convening to finalize the exact material specifications, negotiate contracts with a silicon wafer supplier in Taiwan, and rent warehouse space in Europe to establish distribution logistics for mass production. Based on the 5-step process, exactly which phase are you currently operating in?
If we evaluate the specific actions, finalizing material specifications, negotiating procurement, establishing logistics, those activities fall squarely and exclusively into step 4, commercialization and marketing.
Spot on. You have moved past experimentation and are entirely focused on creating market value.
Building the machine to build the product.
Exactly. All right, so we have a process, but a process produces very different results depending on the specific nature of your goal. You cannot manage a new mobile app the same way you manage a new automated welding arm for a car factory.
You really can't.
Which brings us to the classification of innovation, finding your exact flavor.
Categorizing innovation is vital because it dictates where you allocate capital, how you market, and what your timeline looks like. The first, and arguably most fundamental distinction, is between product innovations and process innovations.
Let's unpack product innovation first. This is the one everyone knows. It's the introduction of a good or service that is genuinely new or significantly improved regarding its characteristics or user-friendliness.
Yes. Tangible improvements in technical specs, materials, software interface. The classic example is the modern electric vehicle, like a Tesla. They took traditional car elements and combined them with entirely new power sources and software controls.
And there is a fascinating trend mentioned here called servitization. It's a clunky word, but a profoundly important concept.
It describes when a traditional product innovation begins to heavily incorporate service aspects, completely changing the business model. We see this with software as a service, or SaaS.
Right, you don't buy a CD-ROM anymore, you subscribe to a cloud service.
And it's bleeding into physical products, too. The automotive industry is attempting to shift EVs towards subscription models or car-sharing solutions.
The physical product essentially becomes a conduit for an ongoing service relationship. Now, contrast that highly visible product innovation with process innovation.
A process innovation is the implementation of a new or significantly improved production or delivery method. It is the innovation that happens behind the closed doors of the factory.
So, changes in manufacturing techniques or supply chain routing.
Exactly. The primary goal is rarely to change the product itself. The goal is typically drastically decrease unit costs, increase quality, or make mass production possible.
Like semiconductor chip manufacturing or automated DNA sequencing. If you're a patient getting a genetic test, you just get an email with your results. From your perspective, the product hasn't changed at all. You have absolutely no idea that a massive process innovation occurred in the lab that made running that test 90% cheaper and 10 times faster.
That invisibility to the consumer is a defining characteristic of process innovation. And there is a brilliant strategic life cycle detail regarding the timing of these two. Product innovations tend to cluster and intensify at the very beginning of an industry's life cycle.
Before dominant design standards are agreed upon.
Right. Early personal computers, early cars, everyone is trying wild new features. Competition is entirely based on the product.
But once the dust settles and everyone agrees a car has 4 wheels and a smartphone is a black rectangle of glass, what happens?
Once the design standard is locked in, product innovations plateau and process innovations intensely accelerate. Competition shifts entirely to who can manufacture that standard product most efficiently at the lowest possible cost.
The competition shifts from the drawing board to the factory floor. That makes so much sense. Okay, the next major classification and distinction is evaluating the degree of novelty. Incremental versus radical or breakthrough innovations.
Incremental innovations are evolutionary, smaller, steady improvements over time. The market already exists, competitors are known, and specific customer needs are clearly articulated.
Because they respond to existing needs, this dynamic is powered by what we call market pull.
Exactly. The market actively pulls the innovation out of the company. Consumers say, we want a battery that lasts 2 hours longer. The company listens, makes the tweaks, and provides the updated product. Is safe and predictable.
But radical or breakthrough innovations are the exact opposite. They completely shatter accepted norms.
Yes. And because they are unprecedented, customer needs are completely unknown or latent. You can't use focus groups for a breakthrough innovation because the consumer has no frame of reference.
Nobody was demanding a decentralized digital currency before Bitcoin.
Precisely. Therefore, breakthrough innovations rely on technology push. The visionary entrepreneur forcefully pushes it into the market, attempting to build a completely new market segment. It is incredibly high risk.
Which naturally leads us to disruptive innovations. The sources give some excellent examples. Cloud computing services pushing aside boxed software. Uber disrupting transport. 3D printing threatening traditional manufacturing.
The key is they don't merely offer a substitute. They generate new applications addressing completely new, previously ignored market segments.
So here's a question that always comes up. Why do massive dominant corporations with billions in R&D and deep market dominance consistently fail to see these disruptive threats coming until it's entirely too late?
It's the innovator's dilemma. The answer lies in how disruptive technologies initially present themselves. When a disruptive tech first emerges, it almost always looks incredibly immature, highly unreliable, and of very low quality compared to the established standard.
It looks like a toy.
Exactly. The executives at Kodak look at early digital cameras, which had terrible resolution, and rationally think, our professional film photographers will never use this, we're safe.
They're listening too closely to their best customers, who demand incremental improvements on the old technology.
And this creates an unprotected incubation period for the disruptive entrepreneur. They target the low-end, ignored segments. By the time the disruptive technology matures and ascends into the mainstream, it has a vastly cheaper cost structure. It's too late for the established firm to catch up.
And there's another massive hurdle for the big legacy corporations: path dependency.
Path dependency is the economic version of the sunk cost fallacy. Established firms have invested unfathomable amounts of capital into their present systems, billions in specialized factories and deeply ingrained supply chains.
Changing to a disruptive technology means deliberately destroying your own balance sheet.
It is painfully costly. A striking example is how some established hospitals resisted robotic surgery innovations. They were deeply path-dependent, having invested millions in traditional operating theaters and surgeons mastering manual techniques.
Trapped by their own historical success. Okay, listener, let's run another startup stress test.
Let's hear it.
The challenge here is vital. Accurately identifying whether you are building a product for an existing market incrementally or trying to radicalize a new market. Here is the scenario. A prominent automotive company figures out a highly advanced AI-driven way to orchestrate the robotic welding arms on their assembly line. Because of this new software, they can manufacture their flagship EV battery 30% faster and unit cost drops by 20%. However, the actual battery placed into the car has the exact same dimensions, capacity, and range as the previous version. The consumer experiences absolutely no difference in performance. Here's the scenario. Based on our classifications, is this breakthrough a product innovation or a process innovation?
Textbook, pure process innovation. We must evaluate what actually changed from the end user's perspective. The tangible product was not altered or improved for the consumer. The innovation occurred entirely behind the scenes to decrease unit costs.
Exactly. Look at where the value was created. All right, we're moving into the most legally treacherous territory. Segment 4. Fortifying the castle. Your intellectual property strategy.
This is where abstract ideas collide with legal realities.
Let's assume you have created a brilliant, disruptive product. The immediate, terrifying reality is that massive, well-funded competitors will attempt to ruthlessly copy it. If you can't build a legal moat, you'll be crushed. How do you protect it?
You must develop a sophisticated IP strategy. The framework outlines the big four of IP rights: patents, copyright, trademarks, and trade secrets. Let's begin with patents.
Patents generally relate to inventions that produce a tangible, technical result, a new physical mechanism or unique hardware architecture.
It grants the holder a government-sanctioned temporary legal monopoly, usually for 20 years. But you only receive that protection in exchange for a social contract, the full, detailed public disclosure of exactly how the invention works.
You trade your secrecy for a monopoly. But this system lays out 3 incredibly strict requirements for a patent. First, novelty. It has to be genuinely new. Second, non-obviousness, an inventive step. And third, utility. It has to actually function.
And we must aggressively highlight a crucial warning regarding novelty. A patent application will instantly fail if the invention has already been disclosed in public prior to filing.
Oh, this happens constantly today.
Yes. If you post a comprehensive YouTube video explaining your prototype before you file your patent application, you legally destroy its novelty.
Do not post the victory lap video to social media before you call your patent lawyer. It is a fatal error. Okay, the second pillar, copyright.
Copyright operates in a different sphere. It refers to the legal right to reproduce, distribute, or perform one's own original expression of an idea. Literary texts, dramatic works, and crucially for tech startups, original software source code.
Now, I am fascinated by a specific quirk regarding copyright that behaves fundamentally differently from a patent.
It's a vital distinction.
Yeah.
A patent is a strict monopoly. If I hold a patent and you independently invent the exact same thing a year later without seeing my work, my patent blocks you, period. But copyright is not a monopoly on the idea itself, only the expression.
Meaning independent creation is protected.
Yes, if a programmer in Tokyo and a programmer in London independently write the exact same string of complex code, and both can prove independent creation, both are legally protected by their own copyright.
That is wild.
Yeah.
Okay, moving to the third pillar, trademarks. Trademarks protect a company's brand identity. Logos, brand names, slogans.
They ensure that when a consumer sees the golden arches, they know exactly what quality of food they are getting, and another company cannot deceive them by using a similar logo.
But this brings us to an incredible dilemma regarding the future of trademarks in the era of artificial intelligence.
The AI shopping dilemma.
Yes, let's spend some time here. Historically, all trademark litigation centers entirely around human psychology. It relies on subjective concepts like potential for confusion and the perspective of the average, reasonably observant consumer. If I open a cheap fast food joint called McDonald's with an A human driving by will get confused. Trademark law prevents that.
But what happens when the consumer is no longer human? If an AI algorithm or a smart home assistant is doing the shopping for us, it does not get confused by similar logos.
And AI doesn't squint at the packaging. It looks at the raw binary data, the manufacturer ID.
Precisely. The AI operates on absolute data precision. Therefore, the traditional legal concepts of brand awareness and human confusion simply do not apply to algorithmic consumption.
So if an AI is purchasing batteries, it doesn't care about the flashy logo. It cares about the cost per milliamp hour ratio. Does brand equity just die?
It is a massive existential crisis for brand strategy. Century-old principles of trademark law will likely have to be radically reinterpreted by the courts to protect proprietary data signatures rather than just visual logos.
A staggering paradigm shift.
Mhm.
Finally, the fourth type of IP, trade secrets and know-how.
These exist entirely outside formal registration systems. There is no patent office for trade secrets. Protection relies entirely on the information being kept strictly, relentlessly confidential.
Like the formula for Coca-Cola or Google's original search algorithm.
Exactly. But the law only protects you if you take rigorous, demonstrable steps to prevent the public from learning about it. You have to lock the doors and encrypt the servers.
Which brings us to a terrifying practical reality. You have a brilliant trade secret, but you have to pitch your idea to VCs to get funding. How do you balance explaining why your tech is superior without giving away the secret sauce?
The standard legal mechanism is the non-disclosure agreement, or NDA. Before you reveal the deep technical mechanisms, you legally oblige the receiving party to maintain absolute confidentiality.
Now, let's talk strategy for SMEs. Patents are incredibly expensive. How do you choose between a patent and a cheap trade secret?
There is a golden strategic rule for this, and it hinges on the physical nature of the innovation. Evaluate the vulnerability of the product to reverse engineering. If a competitor can buy your product, take it into their lab, and reverse engineer it, a trade secret provides absolutely zero protection.
Because once you sell it, the secret is out in the wild.
Exactly. In that scenario, you must protect it with a patent. Conversely, if it cannot be easily reverse engineered like a complex manufacturing process hidden inside your factory, keeping it a trade secret might be the vastly smarter route.
And savvy tech startups engage in bundling their IP rights, overlapping layers of defense, trademark the logo, patent the hardware, copyright the software code, fortify the castle. Okay, it is time for our next startup stress test. Listeners, evaluate the strategic IP dilemma based on the golden rule of reverse engineering. You and your co-founder have invented a revolutionary physical microchip that drastically reduces power consumption in data centers. You know for a fact that the moment you sell this chip, competitors like Intel will immediately purchase one, place it under an electron microscope, and easily map the specific architecture. Should you rely on a trade secret and strict NDAs to protect your IP, or should you spend the capital to file for a comprehensive utility patent?
Unambiguous answer. You must file for a patent. Because it's a physical piece of hardware that can and will be easily reverse engineered, maintaining secrecy once it enters commerce is a physical impossibility. A trade secret offers zero protection here. You require the legal monopoly of a patent.
Nailed it. Reverse engineering completely destroys trade secrets. All right, we have reached the final phase. Segment 5, giving the innovation a home. You've survived the 5-step process, built an ironclad IP strategy. But an isolated innovation in a lab doesn't generate revenue. It needs a commercial vehicle. It is time to develop the venture.
This is the culmination of the journey. Inventions need to become deeply integrated into new organizational structures with sustainable business models. That structure is the venture.
How do we rigorously define a venture?
A venture is a new business activity involving the potential for significant economic return and the presence of significant risk. And it's all architected around the founder's initial vision.
But having a strong vision does not mean being dangerously rigid.
Absolutely not. Developing a venture is a profoundly iterative process. Your core ideas must adapt as new information is gathered from the market.
Sticking to your original idea out of sheer stubbornness when the market says no is a death sentence. The market does not care about your pride. The singular goal is to create tangible value for specific customers. So how do you decide who you are creating value for?
The framework categorizes ventures into 3 main quadrants based on target customer profile: B2B, B2C, and B2G. And the critical survival advice is fiercely limit your idea development to only one of these quadrants initially.
Wait, focus is survival. Do not try to serve a massive corporate enterprise and a teenager on day one. Let's break down the quadrants. First, B-Day, business to business.
B2B ventures sell their products to other companies, like Amazon Web Services. Businesses have vastly more capital than individual consumers, but their psychology is completely different. There are three primary ways you can create value for a corporate customer in B2B.
If your product doesn't do at least one of these three things, a business will not buy it.
Exactly. First, provide a product that directly helps the company make more money. Second, provide a solution that helps the company save money by decreasing operational costs. Or third, provide a system that helps the company comply with complex government regulations.
Compliance software is a massive hidden industry. Why is it such a powerful driver for B2B sales?
Risk aversion. The psychological fear of a catastrophic government shutdown or massive fines often overrides standard financial desires. If your software guarantees a bank won't violate federal law, you are selling the CEO the ability to sleep at night.
Businesses buy cold, hard profit drivers
Yeah.
and risk mitigators. Okay, the second quadrant, B2C, business to consumer.
Companies like Facebook or Spotify, you are selling directly to individuals. You're dealing with a vastly wider, far more irrational range of human desires, entertainment, fashion, status.
And there's a massive structural warning here, the single product trap.
The consumer market is hyper-competitive and trend cycles fade fast. A single viral product might enjoy massive short-term success, but competition will replicate it, and consumer boredom will set in.
You cannot just be a one-hit wonder.
To survive in B2C, you absolutely must develop a continuous pipeline of potential new products and brand extensions to feed the consumer's desire for novelty.
Finally, the third quadrant, BG, business to government.
Selling to local, state, or federal organizations. This is fundamentally different because governments are spending taxpayer money. They are bound by intensely strict bureaucratic routines.
The dreaded RFP process.
The request for proposal. Vendors must respond with highly detailed, legally binding bids, and crucially, the agency is almost always legally bound to accept the lowest cost bid that meets the requirements.
So you operate with a severe lack of pricing power. It's absolutely not a space for rapid, flexible pricing models. Okay, listener, it's time for our final startup stress test to lock in this venture architecture. Imagine you're a software engineer who coded an automated platform designed to help mid-sized commercial construction companies automatically file the complex environmental and safety paperwork required by new state regulations. Which specific quadrant are you operating in, and what is your primary value proposition?
Well, you are explicitly selling software licenses to commercial construction companies, not homeowners, not the state. Therefore, you are clearly operating in the B2B quadrant.
And the value proposition.
Out of the three B2B value propositions, your software provides the third. You are helping the company automatically comply with complex government regulations. By automating the paperwork, you eliminate the risk of devastating state fines. You are selling operational security.
Perfect analysis. Which brings us to the end of our deep dive. We've covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's synthesize this journey.
The overarching narrative is uncompromisingly clear. Innovation is not a serendipitous flash of isolated genius. It is a highly demanding gauntlet. It requires favorable macroeconomic conditions. It demands a rigorous, iterative, five-step organizational process. It requires strategic foresight to classify your innovation product versus process, incremental versus radical.
It necessitates an ironclad IP strategy to build a moat. And finally, a carefully chosen B2B, B2C, or B2G venture vehicle to deliver that value.
It is a brutal, unforgiving gauntlet.
It really is. And it leads me to a final, somewhat provocative thought for you to chew on as we wrap up. You could theoretically possess the most radical, flawlessly engineered, disruptive technology in the world. But if you launch it using a B2C subscription model targeting fickle teenagers, when its true value was meant to be a B2B compliance tool for enterprise corporations, your startup will fail. So it raises a lingering question. When we look at the staggering failure rate of new startups, is that failure usually the fault of the underlying invention simply not being good enough? Or is it far more often the fault of poor venture design, emotional stubbornness, and a fundamental failure to execute the business mechanics we discussed today?
That is the multi-million-dollar question. In my experience, the science rarely fails. The business model does.
Exactly. Thank you for joining us on this exhaustive journey through the mechanics of innovation. As you navigate the world this week, look closely at the products and software you interact with. Ask yourself, is this a product or a process innovation? Is it incremental or radical? And how did the founders build the moat to protect it? Until next time, keep analyzing the machinery behind the market.